Tabitha Panariso, it is so good to have you here. Thanks for joining me on For Real.
It's such an honor to be here and to be able to talk with you.
I'm so stoked. I would love to ask first off the top, where and how did you grow up? That's part
Mm.
one. And how is that life different than the one that you're building with your husband, Ethan, and your kids?
That's such a great question. I grew up as a military brat, which is really just fun lingo that says I moved pretty much every 3 years of my life.
Wow. Wow.
Um, was born actually in Bitburg, Germany, and then from there kind of traveled the southern states with my mom. She was a single mom for much of my life until she remarried my stepdad when I was probably about 10.
Mm.
And then somewhere along the line, we settled in Colorado, and I've been here ever since, probably because the part of me that didn't love moving and didn't love having an anchor really resisted the idea of ever moving again.
Yeah,
So,
right.
I got married, met my husband here, and we've been here ever since. And it's kind of odd as somebody who's moved their entire life. When people ask me, how long have you lived here in Colorado? I have to calculate, and I'm shocked when I can say it's been 28 years.
Wow.
It's so significant to me to be in a
Mm.
place and a space for that long and to have history in different places and to see a city change and grow and, be something other than what it was years
Mm.
ago. And so very practically, that is how my life looks different. I think it's more stable in
Mm.
many ways.
Mm. You talk and write and live out a lot of questions about being rooted and where you anchor.
Yeah.
So that's interesting for me to hear how you began. And that I think oftentimes we either react or reflect, as my friend Bob says. So that's, it sounds like you're building something that you didn't have. And I love it that you're shocked every time you have to tell the stat. 28 years, you say, with surprise, even though you've been there for those long
Yes.
years.
Yes.
I want to talk to you, Tabitha, about quitting things.
Mm.
Here's where I'm landing with that. You've spoken and written, we're going to talk about your book in a little bit, but a lot about the grace that we open ourselves up to when we quit something. So, for example, you quit social media a few years ago, which on paper, sister, as you know, if you're a writer and a speaker and a get your work out there kind of girl, that's very contrarian. That's like, I don't actually love social media. I've been fairly clear about that. I try to embrace the good, but it's not an easy place for me to be. So I'm so curious about how you made that decision and as extension, how you can coach us, coach the listeners, coach me on when we know when to quit.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a big part of my story was, I think, probably at my most ambitious season in
Mm.
life when I really did care about numbers and platform and all of these different things for what I could justify was good reason. I did want to write. I did have these dreams and these visions of what my life could look like. And I understood
Mm.
that this thing could be the conduit to like get me there, right? Like there's
Right.
a lot of strategizing involved in it. And I remember the day like it was yesterday, just laying in my bed, having a conversation with the Lord and felt like he was asking me to give this thing up and asking me really like what my priority in life was. Was it trust and faith in the bigger thing, or was it control in the smaller thing? And very tearfully, um, and very angrily, I think almost even somewhat resentfully, I decided to delete everything the next day. And it really became a just a point of surrender. And I think when we live open-handed, we actually let there be more room for us to hold on to the things that are meant for us versus when we live gripped or our fists clenched closed, we miss out on the things that we could learn and grow from. And so that really was pivotal in me understanding even just my own path in life and what I was moving into was acknowledging, I think, and maybe this is how I would coach people in this, is that our our timing just isn't always aligned up with where our life is actually right now in this moment, that we can be kind of impractical or unrealistic about what it is that we hope for, but what it is that we actually have capacity for, or even like what we're prepared for as a person. And so I think being able to take a step back and acknowledge maybe where our motivations are, or maybe where our vision isn't clear, is really an important piece of the process when it comes to quitting, right? For me, it was just about laying down the thing that I felt like identified me, that had become my identity. And in doing that, it expanded who I was even more, right? It offered so much more life to learn from. And so then when I finally came back to Instagram and social media, it felt different. It felt more freeing. It felt like I could move from a place of love instead of moving from a place of obligation or even like fear. Because I think that was a big
Mm.
piece of it, was fear was ruling my life. And so I think that's a pivotal question someone can ask themselves when they're thinking about quitting something is, what do I feel like is being threatened here if I walk away? Right? What is it that I'm afraid is going to happen? And I think that helps us analyze our motivations and really take a real honest look at why we're doing the thing that we're doing,
Mm.
and make the decision, do we want to continue to live that way? Is
Mm.
that really how we want to live our life?
I so appreciate how you're talking about this and walking us through the moments that made you pivot.
Mhm.
For folks who are listening who have not gotten on the very odd train of writing and publishing books,
Yeah.
I just feel like I have to say this is there is an outsized importance placed on social media numbers. It's kind of like publishing companies and agents and folks want to have some number to
Yeah.
decide, okay, well, this number means we will recover our investment. And so for you, I want that background, because for you to decide, no, actually, I'm going dark. That is very countercultural, and I can imagine that in the first moments, especially, you probably were. That takes no small amount of bravery and probably some second guessing, thinking, "Is this? Am I stopping this dream?"
Yeah.
And I'm so glad to hear that you actually did not have the power to stop the dream. It was
Yeah,
more
that's
that
right.
you were reminding yourself what is under all of this. It's so,
Mhm.
and it's not just for writers or content creators or what have you. I feel like we often get on a road and start sprinting without thinking, wait a minute, why am I doing this? What's behind this? So for you to say, actually, I found freedom on the other side of this, just so clutch. I'm so glad you did. Um, I'd like to talk a little bit about your new book. It's called Loyal in His Love. The subtitle is An Invitation to be Held by Jesus When Others Let You Go. Beautiful cover, by the way. Way to go,
Thank
Zondervan
you. They did
Reflective.
great.
Um, you did not want to write this book.
No.
Why?
I wanted to write something that was less vulnerable. Thank you.
Uh, if you were voting, you were going less vulnerable,
Yes.
more instructive. Got it.
Yeah. I just, so the book is about rejection and betrayal and abandonment and all of these really deep, yucky feelings that we all feel, and that I have especially felt through the course of my life, and really realized has marked my life and has formed me in many ways. And so writing the book, I think I knew intuitively that it meant bearing my soul to the world in a way that felt really scary and frightening to do, but also bearing myself, like my soul to myself, and
Mm.
like actually looking at these pieces of who I am, and acknowledging them and saying, "Oh, yeah, that is part of my story." And "Oh, yeah, that is how I have navigated that." And some of those ways that I navigated it weren't so great, and sometimes they were. Sometimes it's embarrassing. And so I think I knew I'd be finding myself while writing about these things, and that
Mm.
was terrifying to do. Yeah.
Did that decision to write this kind of book come after your going dark from the spaces where you'd been building a different identity online? not a different, but that you've been fleshing out some of these ideas publicly, and then you took a take.
Yeah.
How did you know? How did you pivot to, I'm going to write the book I don't want to write?
Yeah, actually, that had happened years prior. So I think
Okay.
it was probably one piece to it. I think I had really been working through and uncovering and unearthing a lot of like my people pleasing tendencies and even my desire to just want to belong to the masses in whatever way I could, right? So that was like an unmasking. So I think a lot of my life has been these phases of unmasking myself and really getting down to who I really am. But what really propelled me into writing the book was I went through two friendship breakups, and that was really difficult for me. Not even really because of how it happened or who they were, but because it really revealed these wounds that hadn't healed
Mm.
and suddenly just festered wide open. And so I'm going through life trying to figure out what I'm going to write this book about, had this other idea, but then in the midst of that, I'm like, wow, like this is the thing, actually. This is the thing that really is a heart subject that matters a lot. And there's nothing out there that's helping me. I don't know how to navigate this. And how do I get through this? And so it was kind of born from, well, one, obedience and feeling compelled to write the thing. But also the second piece was I want to give a voice to the people who have walked this really hard journey of rejection and take their hand and walk alongside them too. That mattered to me.
You write about bringing Jesus into hard memories. And I'd love for you to talk about this because you
Yeah.
encourage us to look at the worst moments and watch for where the presence of God was falling.
Mhm.
You say our brains are lazy by default, that we actually need to teach them
Mhm.
attention bias, to
Yeah.
teach them personal responsibility. I would love for you to talk about this. You mentioned Hesed, which I think is the biblical term for loving kindness,
Mhm.
and used a ton in scripture. And so, with that framework, looking for God's loving kindness, even in, maybe especially in the worst, the memories we don't even want to revisit, how do you do this and why does it matter?
Yeah. At basic, the stories we tell ourselves shape the stories that we live, right? And so when we are revisiting our memories and our past experiences, how we tell that story and how we make meaning of those stories really matters to how we ultimately live our life with other people or even how we see ourselves, right? It's creating this identity. And so it is really easy for our mind to see what has occurred in our life and focus on the pain or the suffering or the hardship of it, right? And so I share how we can actually visualize those memories and we can practice experiencing or looking for the Lord and where he was at, right? Just closing our eyes, remembering where we were, and thinking, where was Jesus in that moment, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that he fixed it or, he solved the problem, but just knowing that he was with you, I think adds such a depth to what we can focus on, right? And so that is that Hesed love, is that even though we have experienced these, and some of us have experienced really horrible parts of our stories, when we can go back and say, oh, Jesus was there in all of that. He was with me in all of that. That really changes even just the way that we can heal and also continue to move on in our life, right? Knowing that things will continue to happen to us that are hard, but we don't have to go through them alone. And
Hmm.
that makes all the difference.
I can hear pushback of
Yeah.
someone who
Tell me.
says, how do I do that practice in a way that honors the story, doesn't diminish or even Pollyanna something up, right? So this
Yeah.
horrible thing happened. I was there. This was the room. How do you encourage people to do that in a way that both honors the hard part, but doesn't force us to stay stuck in the devastation. I'm not sure if I'm asking that in a way that makes
Yeah.
sense, but
Yeah. No, I think that's a really great question because I think what that does is it reveals how we see God in the first place, right? That maybe some of us see God as somebody who can only enter into our presence when we are put together or when we are perfect. And so, one way to combat even that thought is to know the true character of Christ, right? Like when we look at why God sent Jesus in the first place, that was from a place of compassion. And when we look at the word compassion, it means to suffer with, right? That Christ came so he could suffer with us in our brokenness, in our trauma, in these really hard parts of our stories, right? And so Jesus's presence is not an indication of like toxic positivity. Christ's presence is really about being with us and just sitting with us in those spaces, right? And so that can be hard to wrap your mind around, especially when you haven't maybe even had models of that reflected in your own life. What does it look like for someone just to be with you, right? And so I think about it in terms of some of the harder moments in my life, maybe when I even had a miscarriage. Some of the most profound times was when someone came and just sat with me on my couch and brought me chocolate and tea. And we just talked. We didn't even necessarily talk about what had happened. It was just this dignifying of like, you're human and I see you and I'm here for you for whatever you need. Right. And so I think Christ's presence actually gives us an invitation, not just to lament and grieve, but inevitably what compassion does is it does move us forward. It eventually does help us say, okay, I think I can step into a different space. And one of my favorite stories to tell, maybe just for those people who need something a little bit more practical, is I have a daughter who is 8 years old and love her. She is spicy and she's like a nurturer and she's got all of these emotions that she's exploring. And one day I picked her up after school and we were driving down like kind of like a highway to our house. And I just need people to envision like three kids in the car, like trying to get home. They're hungry, they're loud. Like I'm
oh yeah,
also
been there.
hungry. Like,
Hmm.
yes, just we are all dysregulated.
Yep.
Right. And so we're driving down the street and she is upset. She is frustrated. She is mad and she refuses to talk to me about it. And so I, in turn, wanting to fix it and getting angry at her, which is not my like best shining mom moment, right? Like there's plenty of those where I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, just tell me what it is that you want. Can we just talk about this?" And she is like tight-lipped. And there's very little I can do because I'm in the front seat, she's in the back seat,
Right.
right? And so I'm just upset. I don't know how to fix this problem. And so finally we get home. I'm taking like a big breath in my van before I go inside. And I'm like, okay, we're going to do something different. So we go inside. I gather her into my arms. I'm like, hey, do you want to sit with me for a little bit? And she's like, okay, mom. And we just sit there for 5 minutes without saying anything. And she's still visibly upset. She's still angry. And then, without having had a conversation, she's like, okay, mama, I love you. And then just hops off my lap and just runs upstairs. And like that is the perfect example of what compassion looks like, and more so what it looks like to invite Christ into our story.
Mm.
Is there's no pressure or an agenda or even a timing for us to feel like we're better. Just by him being with us, eventually we will.
Mm. So good. Great story. You should be a writer or something. One of the principal and most formative rejections you have endured and that you write about in Loyal in His Love was from your biological dad.
Mhm.
He has passed away, and you write that there was both grief and freedom in his passing. You knew at that point how to hold both to the undoing of that relationship and the hope that you had found in letting go of it. So, for our listeners who are neck deep in relationships of estrangement or pain or rejection or disappointment, abandonment, even,
Mhm.
what do you know on the other side of a relationship of the relationship with your dad that can help folks who are walking that very same road?
Yeah. Hmm. Such a good question. I think what I'll say will feel touchy. And so to prepare the listener's heart,
Bring it on. We love touchy responses here.
I think that we put more of ourselves into people than we realize. And even when they are our family, which feels so natural
Right.
for us to be bonded together, right? Because we share blood. For me, there was this undoing that had to happen of separating myself from my biological dad and realizing that his actions and who he was really didn't define me or doesn't define me. And I think that's probably the hardest part of unraveling ourselves and unshackling ourselves from relationships that are estranged, is figuring out what our boundaries look like, where I begin and where they are, where I end, where they begin. Like where are we separated from one another? And I think being able to acknowledge that you might be more, to use some therapy lingo, enmeshed in that relationship, if you will, that helps process how you can move on and asking yourself, where do I need to let go of them being a part of my identity and who I am? And so there is this big piece of surrendering that relationship and letting it just be what it is.
Yeah. Thank you for answering with such vulnerability and touchy. That wasn't even touchy. You didn't even cuss or anything. I appreciate your honesty and for how you are not just helping us figure this out, but these are road tested ideas. You're not just a sage. You actually have been here and you are here. So I so appreciate that. I have a final question that I ask all of my guests, and I'm actually switching things up this time. Usually this is the very last word. This is the penultimate word this time because you're getting the last word. My second to last word question for you is, as a book writer and reader, you have a fantastic bibliography, by the way, in this. I added several titles to my to be read list. I ask all of my guests, what is a book on your bookshelf that you recommend? This is wide open spaces. You get to choose anything that you have loved, that you have recommended a lot of times, that you're excited about reading. You take that wherever you want.
Oh my word. Oh, you should have prepared me because
you can have time. Pause, Betsy. We're just going to have time to think here for a second.
Let me think. Let me look at my book list right now.
Totally. No worries. I know how this goes.
Funny story is I only read 2 books last year.
Yeah, and that's because you were writing it and editing it. Totally.
But it's so embarrassing because
it's not, there are seasons. This could be something you read in 2002. So
yes,
whatever you love.
I'm looking at, I have a notes app that has all of my books that I've read that I've enjoyed over the years. Oh, this is such a good question.
It's no pressure. Only book nerds freak out about this. Like, I actually hate this question in an interview because I'm like, I feel like I have to choose a child that I like. I can't choose. So it's just anyone. It doesn't have to be your favorite of all time. Just something you think people would like.
Oh, I know which one I'm going to do. I just want to get the title right. Where is it at? The book I would recommend recently that I've read in the last year or two is How to Stay Married by Harrison Key. Yeah.
By whom? I missed the author.
Harrison Key.
Okay. How to Stay Married.
Yes.
That sounds like a very practical book.
It's not what you think, actually. It is memoir based. It is deeply poignant and hilarious and just so honest and frank. And those are the kinds of books I'm just really attracted to right now. It's just people who lay it out on the table.
Yeah. Well, that's because you just did it. You know about the self-flagellation. You're
Yes.
asking others. Okay, How to Stay Married. I think I have heard of that title before, so I'm excited to read that.
He's
Okay.
an excellent writer. I think you'll enjoy him.
Okay, fantastic. We'll put that in the show notes. To end our time together, Tabitha, I would love for you to read a section of your book. You write about kind of borrowing the format of Psalm 136,
Mm-hmm.
and dovetailing on what we were talking about before, looking for the goodness of God, looking for the presence of God, even in the roughest moments. Would you
Yeah,
read your version of Psalm 136 to finish us out today?
I would love to. All right. Psalm 136, Tabitha's version. The God who was with me when my own father left me, for his loyal love endures forever. The God who embraced me when I was alone, for his loyal love endures forever. The God who was steady when nothing else was, for his loyal love endures forever. The God who empowered me to be unlike the legacies left before me, for his loyal love endures forever. The God who received our tears when we lost our first child, for his loyal love endures forever. The God who was our refuge when the church couldn't be, for his loyal love endures forever. The God who befriended me when I was friendless, for his loyal love endures forever. The God who saw me and provided for me when no one else did, for his loyal love endures forever.
Thank you, Tabitha. It's such a joy to talk with you.
Thank you.
Godspeed on what you're doing today, and thanks for writing a beautiful book.
Thank you for just being you and asking such excellent questions.
It's been so fun to talk to you. I really appreciate your time.